welcome to Real Talk. I'm your host, Pastor Ed King. This is Eric and Ed podcast. Welcome back to another episode. How you doing?
Doing well.
Great job.
Yeah.
Last episode, I was going to say last week, but last episode did a great job.
Thank you.
Family doing good?
Yeah, overall, it's always an adventure with kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, doing well. I'm going to head out to a choir concert, show choir after this.
All right. I actually have to work today.
So. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And I told you I've been up since 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you get almost 60 years old, you're not supposed to be up.
No.
4 o'clock in the morning. Thinking at 4 o'clock in the morning. Who does that?
You got a lot of things going on in that noodle, right?
A lot of it, I think we had a restorative justice, juvenile justice summit this week with our Empowerment Network conference that I went to. And all the questions and all the thoughts and, that was there, it really got me thinking about a lot of stuff. And I was thinking about in the work that we do, of course, I've been working with pretty kids almost 40 years, believe it or not, in some kind of way, whether it's coaching, working at a place like working at the Hope Center, of course, with the church and those type of things. And one of the themes that were going on at the conference, I wanted to get your thoughts on it. The theme that was going on at the conference this week is that the crime among the teenagers are getting younger and younger. And so they're I guess some new laws are about to come out, or they're trying to pass some new laws about one of the main thing that really, really kind of had everybody in an uproar this week. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. They were talking about lowering the age of charging youth as an adult. Like they said, I think it's 11 and 12-year-olds. They want to. There are talks of changing the law where you can charge them as adults. And I was thinking, man, I'm being honest. I said, okay, how do I really feel about that? And all kind of things were racing through my mind because my thought was, oh no, I'm gonna let you go first. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, we have a social contract that we establish as a civil society, right? And so we establish guardrails and boundaries. And one of the nice things about how America is structured is that we get to do that in different ways. So most of our decisions typically aren't constrained at that federal level. You get to the state level and then you get to the civic or local level. And so that means we get to address things differently than, Mobile, Alabama, or, Baltimore, Maryland, or Wichita, Kansas, theoretically. And so when it comes to something like this, you got to look at, all right, who did we elect as our city leaders? Who are our folks that are involved in the conversation? And do we have a problem that needs to be addressed, which is why you would do legislation. So all that to say, okay, how different is the world today from 20 years ago?
Wow.
How different are our 12-year-olds today than 20 years ago? How different are they from 100 years ago? Right? And you think about what a 12-year-old was doing 20 years ago or 100 years ago.
That's a good point.
Compared to what they're doing now. And are the 12-year-olds operating in a capacity that 16-year-olds used to? Because again, laws are just simply a manifestation of words that people at the time put together and decided were a good idea. Right? Ideally, they're, godly inspired, and they're godly individuals that have said, hey, your wisdom, Lord, not ours, is this right? Obviously, that doesn't happen all the time. Obviously, there's a history of corruption in many cities. And I'm not saying the laws on the books now are a result of that. I'm just saying we're living in a fallen world. Man can make mistakes all the time. So in a practical sense, how I react to that is, well, if there's a law that says you can't do something based on a certain age, you have to just evaluate if that age makes sense anymore. And we're in a really weird spot with kids because on the one hand, they're being armed with everything an adult would be armed with. From an information, the way that education has changed, we've taken the adult components. We've absolutely sexualized our kids, right? And we've foisted all those adult components on them. But we've then said, oh, but you're not responsible for anything until you're 25. Are you kidding? Right? So we've created this weird middle ground where kids don't have structure. And then, so what do you do with them? So that's a long-winded way of saying it makes sense to me, given what I know, that if we have we are constrained from taking a child who makes adult decisions and in confining them in a way for the good of the public, if we're constrained from that, we have to eliminate that constraint. I don't necessarily, have the specifics and competency to say what the prescription should be.
Right.
But we have to remove the barrier that allows a civil society to do what's logically necessary to protect society, but then arm us in a way where we can try to help the kid. Right.
Yeah, I remember one time, this has been years ago, I had a lady, a grandmother, she came to me. At that time, she had a 13-year-old grandson. And she told me, she said, Pastor King, I hate for the weekend to come. And she said the reason why she hated for the weekend to come was because of all the shootings and things in her neighborhood. And so she feared for her 13-year-old grandson. And she asked me this question that at that time it was like I didn't have an answer for, and I felt crippled by her question. She said every Friday, she said I hated for the weekend to come. She feared for her 13-year-old grandson. She said because all the shootings and the murders that was happening in her neighborhood. And then she says, does anybody care? And the way she said it, I mean, it hit me in a way that it's like, okay, it was like I believe God was using her to speak to me to say, does anybody care enough to do something about this?
Right.
And so my thought, to your point, I like what you said. My thought was, hey, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. We can't reach 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds.
Right.
And so the era that I grew up in, well, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they play video games. They're in the house before 9 or 10 o'clock.
Right.
They thought like 11-year-olds, thought like 12-year-olds. Right. Well, fast forward to the day, to your point, 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds, it's a different time.
Absolutely.
But I'm still complex about, do I want a 11-year-old charged as an adult? And as I stand right, but do I want that same 11-year-old that committed murder, first degree murder? Do I want him to be charged as an adult? I don't know. If I'm being honest.
Right.
Do I want him to go back home to release to his family? I don't think so.
Right.
Because, I mean, people say, well, because there's been this running debate about, okay, at that young of an age, let's do alternative things for him, which I'm for that. But I'm not for, because he's only 11 years old, he should be allowed to go back home and we'll restart this thing all over again with his family. No, because I feel like there needs to be some steps taken. Oh man, my head is all over the place with this thing.
Yeah.
So the question was, should they be charged as adult? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think they should be allowed to be scot-free.
Right.
And be sent to a nice camp.
Right.
To have fun there, and they call it punishment, and it's not, and it's not.
Right.
But they asked a question. The second question was, when it comes to these youth and the violent crimes that are committed by these youth, what should be done with minors who commit these who commit these heinous crimes? What should be done with them?
Well, and so the answer may be actually not even should they or shouldn't they. I don't know enough about the statutes to say, do they have to be charged as an adult? How about the statute says, hey, you're charged, you're still within the juvenile system, still restricted, locked up, however, depending on the crime. And then there is a transition into, hey, you're not automatically out at 18.
That's right.
Right. Depending on the crime, there may be a carryover. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know all the specifics on that. But, if this new modern age includes 12-year-olds doing things that used to be reserved for 14 or 15-year-olds, is it simply lowering the age, or is it coming up with a different solution? Now, as far as the other ways to intervene, and I know there's a lot of scholarship out there that says that incarceration actually makes things worse. I get that, but you can't hug everything out of somebody, especially when the people often promoting that are the ones that are trying to say coping is the only way through, right? Last time we talked a little bit about coping versus healing and delivering, and God is the only one that can save someone from deep, pain, deep trouble, right? You can't cope them out of it. You can cope them to a level possibly where they're not actively harming themselves, right? Or actively increasing their level of severity of bad actions. but you can't fully heal it.
You can't believe it. We recently, over the last 2 years, we started going to the youth prison. I can't I can't say names, but
Yeah.
when we went in there, they said, well, Pastor King, me and another gentleman from another ministry, they said, where do you guys want to go? And I said, well, take me to the worst
Right.
group that you have in here,
Yeah.
which I don't even know why I said that. And so they took us to the worst group, which was what they call Unit 9. Well, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're going into Unit 9.
And by worst, you just mean most aggressive or most troubled or the worst, the
ones who
hardest crimes.
Hardest crime.
Yeah,
The ones
yeah.
who committed the hardest crimes on the street. And why did I want to go there? I have no idea. So it's like they took us to Unit 9. My hope was that, okay, if we can impact what they say is the worst ones, then maybe it will trickle down to the ones with not as violent crime. Eric, we walked into Unit 9, and we sat down, and I'm looking around, and I'm thinking, okay, these guys are in here for some serious stuff, right? But it didn't take me long to look and see that's my 12-year-old nephew. That's my 15-year-old son. That's my 15-year-old cousin. I start seeing little boys. And when we started talking and conversating, it was like it went from we're visiting the hardcore guys to, man, you guys aren't nothing but kids.
Right.
I mean, it's like, kids that newspaper throwers. Just innocent. And I know they wasn't innocent, but in my mind, the father heart of me was like, I'm looking and talking to little kids.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there thinking, I was like, okay, to some, like, dude, what are you doing here?
Right.
You seem nice, you seem respectful. And they started telling the stories. Okay, there was a couple that was like, okay, I can't see why you would ever be locked up.
Right.
But then there was a few that's like, okay, you need to stay in here because that attitude, that aggressive, tough guy. Hey, if I had a chance to do it again, I'll do it again. You can clearly see. But overall, I just say out of the 11 or 12 that was in there, there was probably at least 9 of them I would be like, man, I would give you a job if you got out tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because you don't seem like, you're a violent criminal, and then you hear what they're in there for. It's like, I would have never guessed.
Right.
So your heart is even that much more complex. Where it's like, okay, if that kid was sentenced to 30 years at 12 years old,
Right.
would I think that would be fair for him? And it's like, well, talk to the family of who that kid victimized. Yeah, they're gonna have he should be in there for life.
Right.
And it's like I was just sitting there thinking, like, okay, Lord, good thing I'm not the final judge.
Right.
Because we wouldn't be fair. Because if you talk to some of these kids after you see them inside prison, and you come out of there feeling like, man, I wish that kid had another chance.
Right.
But then you on the street, it's like that kid should never get out.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, what do you do? What should happen to minors when they commit violent crimes like that? And I'm on question 2. I am stuck. You may look at me and say, Ed King, make up your mind. I'm stuck right in the middle as to what to do with them.
And so the challenge is, and so, I'm going to put aside, I know it's really convenient to do it, but I'm going to put aside the concept of justice being fair or unfair.
Okay.
We could probably spend weeks on that, and happy to do that. But let's just assume that those that are in there actually did commit the crimes and are sentenced appropriately, right? Okay.
Whatever that is.
Right. Okay. So yeah, there are consequences for actions, and the larger a construct gets, the more difficult it is to be individually equitable, I guess I would say. And so if you have someone who made a bad mistake, they were in a bad place, wrong place at the wrong time, maybe they did participate in the action, but there's some statutes that unfortunately penalize them more now because of things that have happened in the past. And so, hey, that's not a bad kid. I would give them a job. They're not prone to doing this kind of thing again. They've learned their lesson. How do you get those kids then in a better place without risking society's safety? Because the one cell over absolutely could care less and would go back to it, right? And so that is a challenge for the justice system. That is a challenge for a city or a district or anything that gets bigger, to where the volume that comes in, How is a judge? How is a prosecutor? How is a parole officer? Right? How can those people care enough, have enough bandwidth, have enough resources to be able to discern this kid is worth the extra? Right? And then what resources are? Is it dispassionate government that is completely flawed in every single way? I mean, good people in government, but government as an entity is not efficient, and it doesn't have a heart. Government simply can only spend the money it confiscates from other people. Well, right there, you've already lost, because how do you ensure the government has enough money to prosecute these things? Well, do you need a police officer on the street, or do you need another counselor? Right? These are the arguments that go on. The whole defund the police thing was all, oh, we're going to send counselors. Well, okay, that's fine as long as nobody's actively shooting, right? But so how do you do that? Is that a role of the church? Is that a role of
question?
Yeah, and so that's when you talk about these things, what hits me is the concept of ambiguity. Who's responsible? That grandmother saying, "Doesn't anybody care?"
Does anybody care?
A lot of people care, but whose job is it? And whose job is it to know whose job it is?
I tell you who's wore out behind it.
Yeah,
The community people. The few community people that really want to see change, and they're being spread out all over the place.
yeah,
They were talking about solutions, right? I know we got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
They were talking about solutions, and this encouraged me. They said, okay, what? Okay, we know the problem. We identify the problem. We see the problem. What do we think some of the solutions are? And my, being a man of faith, was that there need to be more faith-based people involved in our communities.
right.
You know, back in the day, I loved your point of several months ago about the church's role. The church was very active in the community. When I was growing up, the church was very active in the community. The pastors, the leaders, they came to your football game, they came to your baseball games. They had youth groups where they invited you to come. They were they didn't wait for you to line up to come to their church. They were proactive. They were there. Fatherless, if you didn't have a father in the home, the faith-based community I'm old now, but the faith-based community, when I was growing up, they were present. They were always present.
Yep.
The doors of the church were always open. Right? I admit that. Versus now, it seems like the doors of the church are closed.
Yeah.
You know, we have our group. If you don't fit in that group, then you're kind of shut out of that. If you don't go to our church, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Faith-based communities, I think, needs to be more involved. I feel like there needs to be more community-based program that deals with those problems. If, for example, Build Industries, were in the community, part of my company's job would be, I would say, hey, if this is the problems that are happening around our company, our Logiers, our whatever, in North Omaha, and not just North Omaha, but you know what I'm saying. If these are the problems around our community as a business, as a company, what's our role in that? Is it giving 17-year-old Johnny a job to where he can work in our company where he doesn't be out on the streets? I'm just
Right.
all out.
Absolutely.
Is it creating programs to where if you go to, I don't know, if you go to school, if you stay out of trouble, if you can do this, then this is the role from cradle to career. I mean, you know what I mean? Or that type of thing.
Yep.
And I also feel like I said there needs to be, as opportunity happens or presents itself, more volunteerism. It's like, like places like the Hope Center for Kids, for example, at our heyday, when I say at our heyday, during the time where like the early 2000s where crime was really, really bad in our area, one thing I loved about what the Hope Center for Kids were doing, there were volunteers that would come from all over the place to be a part of the solution of what was happening in our community at the time.
Yeah.
So you take us, you got kids at that time, we had at least over 100 kids a day that would come into the building.
Yeah.
Where we may have had, maybe 20 staff, but we had almost seemed like over 50 volunteers that would come and actively be involved. I think if you have an opportunity, God has given each one of us a gift of talent. If you have an opportunity to pour into someone's life in that way, I think we ought to pursue that.
Right.
I can't. There's a man named Lonnie McIntosh. They used to call him Mr. Mac. He's known in the North Omaha community as the Mac Man, Mr. Mac. He was the director at the Boys Club back in the day.
Okay.
Now, remember when I was working at Logiers, I was going to work at that time taking care of 3 little kids. And he called me. He said, Mr. King, he said, what are you doing with yourself? I said, Mr. Mack, I work at Logiers. It's killing me, working all the long hours, thinking he was gonna give me a pass while I told him how long I was working. I said, I'm working at long hours at Logiers. He said, well, yeah, that's nice. He said, but you need to be doing more with yourself. And I'm thinking to myself, what you mean I need to be doing? Man, I'm working at a factory plant. It's 100 degrees in there.
Yeah.
He says, you need to come to the boys club and help coach some of these football teams. And at the time, I'm thinking, like, the selfish part of me was like, hey, Mr. Mack, I don't have time to come to no boys club and coach no kid. But Mr. Mack knew if he got me down there and got me around those kids, he knew that I would stay. I got exactly how it happened. I got down there and got around those kids, and my life has been. I didn't go. I thought I was going for the kids, but God really used those kids to change my life.
Yep.
And some 40 years later, I'm still involved with kids in some kind of way.
Right.
I think and I encourage, especially the men in our community. And you say, well, hey, I got my own business. I got my own. Y'all, we got to step outside of our. We live in a time to where when you take your kid to the park, nowadays you'll benefit the community if you take your kid's friend with you to the park. If you sign your daughter up for baseball, and her friend wants to play and don't have a father, don't have parents at home to be there, the greatest thing we can do is to help that kid too. And I think by doing things like that shifts the tide. Little Bobby, instead of little Bobby hanging out till 11 or 12 at night, well, little Bobby, I'm going to keep you accountable. Hey, all of those things that mentors do. They check up on you. They tell you when you're wrong. They'll encourage you when you're doing good things. They'll help open doors for you that normally probably a kid would never know that could open. And I feel like we've been missing a lot of it. I used to love I'm getting passionate about this thing. I used to love on Saturday mornings when we would play tackle football at the Hope Center.
Yeah.
Eric, the whole community came out to watch those little kids play tackle football.
Yeah.
You would look inside that. You've been there. Inside that fence on Saturday mornings, you couldn't hardly see outside of the fence because there was people all around cheering those kids on like you were watching Tom Brady and Joe Montana, all of that. And I noticed, it breaks my heart to even say this. I noticed you drive through the communities in a lot of cases, and this is not a put down. This is just one man's view.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong. This is what I see. You drive through the parks, and the parks are empty now.
Right. Because you can't swipe your way to the park, and that's the challenge. We're talking about why kids are 11 and 12-year-olds are different now because they don't ever have to get off the couch and they experience the entire world, just not the good parts, right? And if you talk about volunteers, where are all the suburban ladies? They're all swiping, right? Whenever they have a free minute, they're swiping.
Yeah.
Okay. And so nobody has time to volunteer anymore because everything is already in front of them and they have been programmed by experts in monetizing our time, right? To get dopamine rushes based on swiping, right? And it's at either that or clicking and shopping, right? So all these things, it's a concept of modern society because I bet you if we went and measured, there are more programs and more dollars decked out against those things that you're mentioning right now today than ever in the history of Omaha or the country. There are billions and billions spent nationwide on all of these programs. There's millions spent in Omaha, right? But it's not getting better. So what's the challenge, right? And so, I think the Empowerment Network here in Omaha, like other cities, are studying how we have such a cooperative, collaborative group. Because I think we do good work, and I say we royally. God has not freed me up to really get back involved.
You volunteered at the Hope Center.
And a decade ago, I was a lot more involved, with some of the things going on. But yeah, Hope Center, endless opportunity. Yes, I know it always takes work. It's easy to have ideas. It's hard to implement. But there's no reason why this fall you couldn't start a flag football, right, down there. There are so many job programs. I know a farmer right now who would love to have one or two, kids to learn how to farm so he has someone to hand the stuff off to, right? Because, just this generation is not interested in the same things as before because it's so convenient not to be, right? But I tell you, the solutions, again, worldly, money, people, time, energy, they won't solve the root cause.
Right.
And the root cause is spiritual issues, right? And these kids, right, they're afflicted with bitterness, with rebellion, with fear, all of these things, right? And so,
Anger from lack of fathers being around.
Right.
I know people don't like to hear that, but it's true.
right. And if we don't figure out how to help kids learn how important it is to forgive and what it really means, then it never gets fixed, right? And in order to do that, that's where the church has to lead, because unfortunately, the more attention you get, the more people you get involved, the less you actually move forward. Because it takes longer to get a bigger group. Everybody wants to have a voice, right? And the church has to lead, because otherwise the world will just exist, right?
When you hear the term "this generation is lost," what comes? I know we got a minute. Man, I wish.
Yeah, I think
What comes in mind when you hear that?
I think most people thought that this generation's lost. I think probably rarely did the seasoned folks look at the youngins and say, "Oh, y'all are better than us." At least it's been a while, I think. They're not lost. They're just experiencing the consequences of our foolhardy, selfish, and ignorant ways. And that's really the craziest part, that those that have had a couple decades on them, when they get mad at the youth, they're really just ultimately should be mad at themselves for allowing things to get to this point where they're now acting in a way where they're just emulating and or participating in the mess that we've created for them. So
We most definitely going to continue this one. I want to encourage everybody that's actively involved in helping our community and helping our youth. Please continue to keep up the good work. I love what Eric was saying here. It starts and stops with the Lord. We are going to pick this topic up again. And until next week, thank you. I'm Ed. This is
Eric.
And remember, we walk by faith, not by sight. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Yep.